Hey folks, how are you? How are you doing? Are you okay? Are you going through this crisis okay? Are you still in a lockdown? Are you back in a lockdown? Are you able to go shopping without a note? Are you able to go outside and go and visit your parents? Ain't 2020 the weirdest year? Ain't this the weirdest year? This crisis we've been through, crises before, but this one kind of touches everything from very, personal details, like your kids not being able to go to school, kind of go to work, all the patterns, all the rhythm has changed. The rhythm of life, we have to kind of get that rhythm back, and it reminds me of something someone told me the other day about, remember those old records? I still have plenty of those. They have this groove, and it's like we're playing this record called life, and it doesn't have the groove there yet, and it's kind of slowly we're kind of getting there. We're kind of getting into that groove, and once that groove is created, this is where the rhythm, starts to kick in again, and the music starts playing. So I'm really looking forward to that moment that the music starts playing again. But it's going to be another rhythm. It's not the same one that we had. The record has changed. Anyway, so today I'm going to talk to Shinta Oosterwaal. Shinta is an author and a coach, a leadership coach. And we talk about being broken, not like money-wise, but inside. We talk about growing up now compared to 70s, 80s. We talk about the Waldorf School concept. Obviously, we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about her vision on leadership, but specifically on new economics, regenerative economy, Kate Raworth's donut economy. We're going to talk about Charles Eisenstein and the gift economy. And we're going to talk about life-changing moments and about being a WWF Ranger at 8 years old. All right, enjoy. Here we go.
I think I would start out with saying that I'm a well-adjusted girl.
But that needs some explanation.
Yeah. Well, if you'd answer the question that way, we would dive into the matter deeply, right? It's deeply personal. So it has to do with my personal story. I think that I grew up really fast. So I think I always felt a great deal responsible for what happened in the world. For example, I was a ranger at the what's the word? WWF, the Worldwide Fund. I was a ranger at age 7 or 8.
What's a ranger?
You're like a junior member.
How do you become a ranger?
I don't know if they do that still, but in those days, so we're talking about the mid 80s, you could become a junior member, and you could be a very active junior member. So I went around calling at people's houses and trying to sell parts of the Amazon to people, so it wouldn't end up with the big corporations, so it would be used well. And I always held that kind of responsibility, for the world. So I always knew I wanted to change the world. It's quite a big deal for somebody of 7 or 8 years old.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
but is that something
when I look at my daughter now, she's almost 8. She's not busy with changing the world.
When are you selling your rainforest? So when are you selling that rainforest? What's happening? So my question then next question would be, because when you're that age, did your parents influence that? Is there something from your? I mean, what did your your father and your mother, what did they do?
Well, I think that that's part of becoming a well-adjusted girl, is that there wasn't a lot of support emotionally and intellectually. So I had to figure a whole bunch of stuff out on my own. So I did. Um, and I think that made for, um, yeah, for a girl who grew up a little bit too fast.
Right. So when you became a ranger, your parents were like, why?
No, it was actually great fun to become a ranger because it had such a beautiful purpose, right? To save the world through nature. So I really enjoyed that, and there was there was a whole community of these young members committed to making the world a bit of a better place. And of course, you also received every month or something this really cool magazine. So it was quite a big deal. But it just illustrates, for me, it illustrates something about my childhood, which is that I felt responsibility and I wanted to change the world at a very early age on. Um, and I was really determined in that sense. So I don't think that my father or mother could have changed anything about that. It was just I felt it was my purpose.
Okay. And so what was next? So you where did you go to school?
I lived in the south of the Netherlands, and I went to school. So you mean after primary school, and right? Oh, you want to know
Yeah,
all
I
that history?
yes.
Mm. My primary school was in my street, so
Oh, okay.
yeah, it was a very confined childhood. I could walk, to school every day.
What was the town?
Sorry,
Where was it? Which town?
Bergen op Zoom.
Bergen op Zoom. Okay,
Yeah,
yes.
which is very close to Antwerp and very close to the beautiful province of Zeeland, the sea.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And you walked to school.
and it was a. I'm sorry.
And you walked to school. That's because I walked to school too. When I was
You did.
that age. Yeah, I remember
Yeah.
that. Well, it's interesting because my kids are. So my son is now 8, and also when my daughter was that age, we bring them to school.
Mm-hmm.
But I walked to school.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think children, they grow up very differently. I don't know why, but I'm more. Am I more concerned than my parents were? I don't know. It
Mm-hmm.
feels like it. Do you have the same experience?
Yeah, I think that is a really good question. I also remember my childhood being much more carefree, I think, but I don't know if that's true. I know that now, in those days when we were young, um, our parents just make the practical choice for schools, right? It was nearby, so
Right.
that's the school you'd go to.
Yeah.
And I know that now I've chosen a school for my children. So I've chosen the Waldorf education as an educational line to follow, but purposefully, consciously, I chose that. And I don't remember my parents being very occupied with that. So didn't really have those principles. And I think that makes the effort now logical, the effort to make to need them to bring them to school or something. It's okay.
Well, it also depends where you grow up, right? So when I
Mm.
so I think my parents would have they could have chosen a school because there were multiple schools. But if you grow up in Bergen op Zoom, at that time, maybe there were only, 1 or 2 different schools, or I don't know, maybe the choice wasn't that. I feel that now, I know if you grow up in a bigger city, you obviously have more
Mm-hmm.
choice, right? So
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's still for people who grew up in a village and they say, yeah, I would like to go to Waldorf School, but they don't have it. There's no such thing here. I feel that there's a difference between when I grew up in the 80s, early 80s, and when I was, that my parents, of course, they were worried, but I think I'm more worried about my children than they were. I'm more careful with them. So there's a difference. But I don't know. I don't know if you experience the same thing. I think you do. But is that something you're conscious of with your own, with your children, that you let them roam free? Are you different than your and is there a difference between the way you support your children and the way you were supported?
Beautiful question. So the first question, to let them roam free. Yeah, I really enjoy them roaming free. I really wish that for them to exercise that roaming free should they want to. But yeah, and that was also the reason to move from a large city, Amsterdam, where my two children were born, to a smaller place near Utrecht, which is surrounded by foresty area. So this is a beautiful place for them to roam free, and it feels very safe too. So it does. It's very different. I think this is in this context is a very different question to answer than when we were still to live in a city. It would be a very different experience, I think. So here I'm really happy to have them roam free, and it's also part of the second question, of part of my answer to your second question. I do think that I'm raising my children differently. I think we can really look back on our childhood and then come to certain conclusions. You know, what hasn't worked and what has worked, and then learn from that. So beyond blaming our parents or beyond looking back in remorse, I think we can really learn. So I think that's also a responsibility. You know, we were meant to be talking about leadership today, and I think that there's leadership in that too, on this very small scale, which is our family, which is a bit of a universe as well in itself, right? But to look at it and to see, okay, so I've had a certain experience. What can I learn from that? What can I take with me into my new family, which is my focus now? But also, can I look at my children from an objective point of view? What do they need? And that really occupies me every day, I think, because I'm still learning, even though my daughter is 8, my son is almost 4. So we're you know, along that road for a while now, but I'm still learning every day, and then every day there's a new situation that comes up. So especially when they go to school, I think this is really important from the age when they're born until 4. It's kind of a free space. You can do and educate or raise your child any way you like. And then the school period starts. And then what I've seen with my daughter, then you get to learn a whole different aspect of them. So how do they react to learning, I don't know, in a linear way, for example?
Right.
So my daughter is very circular and creative, and you know, she likes to move. So she has a hard time learning math and learning just all the linear stuff. And that brings up doubts within me about how I can support her, for example. And if I'm the right person to support her. And sometimes I'm failing and sometimes I'm successful. And it's an everyday thing.
So, but they're going to, I mean, you've chosen the Waldorf School for them, which is a very creative school, right? So they focus very much on creativity and a very different kind of philosophy than you know, other school systems. Why did you choose that school system for them?
What I found really appealing about learning about Steiner's philosophies is that there's an image of man that is much more complete than any other school that I know of takes as an approach. So looking at a child from more angles, I think, is really important. So I didn't want my children to well, to put it very harshly, to be put into a factory and then come out as a addition to the workforce.
Mm,
Of course, and I believe that every parent wants this. You want your child to flourish, right, as a human being. And I thought that this system would best support them to do so. So that's a choice. And then also, obviously, the creativity, the choices that are made for natural materials to work with, also toys, just stuff that you find in the classroom. It's very, very appealing. It's just so close to nature in that sense. And then also the following the rhythm of life. So they educate while along the lines of the seasons, and it just feels so close
yeah.
to a reality that is much more real to me than just what we see with regular education, just the linear subjects.
Right. Are you worried at all about if they, after sort of middle school, they might go to maybe university or to, other school systems where they cannot kind of get into a Waldorf school system? Are you
Mm-hmm.
worried at all about them being able to adjust to sort of that kind of more linear way of thinking? I would. I mean,
Yeah.
with my children, I'd be worried about that.
But why? Why would it worry you?
I don't know, because I don't want them to be insecure.
Mm.
Right? It's about, I want my kids, I want school to do two things. Actually, it's all they have to do for me. One is make learning fun,
Mm-hmm.
make learning fun for them, and the other is give them, make them secure about themselves. If you
Mm-hmm.
have those two things, you're comfortable with yourself, and you find learning fun. That's your set. That's the only thing. So I'd be worried about that they become insecure.
Coming into a different environment, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like because it is a bit of a bubble, the
Mm-hmm.
Waldorf school system, and I love it. I totally,
Mm-hmm.
I really do. It's just
Mm-hmm.
that can you come out of that bubble and then
Mm-hmm.
find your way into the sort of the
Yeah.
harsh, I don't know, we're making it a bit extreme, like the evil
No, I
outside.
understand. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So just kind of, is that something you're thinking about, or is that
Oh, yeah.
yeah?
Oh, definitely. Of course. And this is such a common question. This is something that is asked to me. Well, we ask ourselves often, right? Only it's also a very strange question, because you consciously choose for a certain approach in education, which considers a human being um, um, as a multifaceted entity that also deserves a multifaceted approach. Um, which is much so this is much more complete than a reductionistic line of education, if you want to follow that. And I'm also now making it very dual, so maybe just for the purpose of our talk here. So I'm not trying to judge anyone or anything. But we're so there, the more complete image of men, and then also considering, we're educating the people that will make society later on, or
Mm.
maybe
Right.
sooner than later even.
So
So can we then,
so you feel responsible for
again.
again, not only for your children but also for society that they are going to be
Well, I,
building.
I feel that I'm filling their backpack, their personal backpack, with much more diverse
Yeah, of course.
skills
Yeah. Oh,
to
it's
do so.
wonderful.
Yeah.
So when you went to you went to primary school, I guess that wasn't a Waldorf
No.
system, and then you went to middle school.
Yeah.
Um, Where did you same also in the same village, the same
Yeah,
town?
of course,
Yeah.
yes. But
Where
Bergen-op-Zoom
you?
is not that small, so it had
No.
a couple of choices actually. And yeah, I went to a school which is called Het Rijks.
Was it a good time?
Yeah, it was a very good time. I think I started to blossom. Yeah, I did because I was really very insecure during primary school. So I didn't think that I was smart enough to learn, which is a big deal, right? To be
Hmm.
thinking about yourself in primary school. But I found out, I went to a school that started clean. So, you get these tests after, at the end of primary school, and then you get a kind of an advice or a suggestion of where you should go, which level you should enter. And I went to a school that said, let's start clean slate. And they did that for the first half year. And that was such an opportunity for me because in that half year, I learned that I wasn't I was very able to learn, and I really enjoyed learning. So I had a really good time at that school. And then at some point, I think in year 3 or 4, I got really demotivated about learning. So I got really good grades for a very long time, and at some point it just crashed.
What
And when I
happened?
now, yes, that's a really good question. When I look back at that period in time, I don't know what really happened, but I think. Um, uh, it must have been a response to what it didn't really happen to me, but it happened in my environment. My father had a really severe depression at that time.
Oh.
So from one day to the other, my home life was changed really drastically, but nobody spoke to me about it. So it was kind of normalized, which was also kind of normal in that time. But
Hmm.
of course, I knew something was very wrong, and I was maybe 15 or something, or yeah, 15, yeah, 14, 15, very young. So somebody should have explained it to me for me to understand, but I don't think anybody did.
Why not? Was
So
it because they were ashamed?
I don't think it was on purpose. I just think nobody really thought of it, or maybe I was an only child, and again, I was very mature at a young age, so maybe they thought that I could deal with it for some reason.
Well, how
I'm
does
not
that
really sure.
how do you know when? So I hear what you're saying, that
Hmm.
you're mature at a young age, but how does that materialize? I mean, yes, you were a
Hmm.
ranger, so that's clearly you had opinions, probably beyond your
Yeah,
years.
yeah.
But so you were on the outside. If I translate it, on the outside, you appear to be almost grown up and wise beyond your years, but inside you were obviously just a child. So is that maybe the misunderstanding?
I think so. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, well, if you, it's circumstantial, right? So I grew up in a home where I didn't really get to experience the example of how to live life, or I didn't really get the support of a child growing up. I was left to my own devices at a very early age. So you have to. It's a survival mechanism.
Is that during the
Um,
depression of your father, or was it
already
before?
before that. Already
Eh,
before that.
But
Yeah.
was it because he was already? I mean, depression is something. I
Yeah.
mean, that's a disease, right? So he
Yeah.
was suffering from depression before
Yeah.
he had that major kind of attack of depression,
Yeah, he was most probably suffering of a couple of psychiatric diseases,
right?
but I didn't know that at that time. And he was working, so at some point he finished. He retired, and then he was home more often, and then it was very palpable. Then it was really, you know. And it really manifested very clearly for me. So I remember those days knowing that my father would be in bed for half of the day. And I also remember very well at that time that I found that that was just normal. That was just my family life. And I didn't really
Yeah.
like it, but I integrated that as normal. And maybe I felt some shame about that. So I couldn't reach out to any other parents or teachers, or had I known that I could have reached out, had I known. But that's yeah. Um, when I tell you this story, it sounds quite
Sad.
sad. Yeah, and it
Yeah.
is sad. That's the
Yeah.
whole. It is, but I didn't know that until I was so much older.
Yeah.
Um,
But then
and
when you were starting to kind of fail at school,
mm,
um, because you said you didn't know why, but that seems a pretty clear reason, right? So I mean,
yes,
right? Your father had a severe
sure, yeah,
depression. He came home. He was home all the time, and so
yeah.
your school suffered.
Schoolwork, yeah, it
Yeah.
did. It suffered severely. Yeah,
Mm.
my grades started dropping. And my teachers were actually very disappointed in me at that time because
Because they didn't know.
they didn't know, but they just saw a demotivated girl, and they thought,
Mm.
and it's also a very difficult time in puberty, and I remember dealing with that disappointment and finding it really really difficult. So that made me feel ashamed a bit more. So and then also I was a very lively girl. I had a lot of friendships, so I really enjoyed that time too, which is two um, contradictory
Yeah.
experiences actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then so at which year was this? So was this in your I mean because you finished the school, right?
Yes.
So it wasn't all bad. It picked up
No.
again, or
Am
did
I making it sound that really bad?
where is this going?
Yeah,
No.
yeah. So much for leadership, huh? Well, no,
Well,
maybe that's where leadership is born, right? So there's a
yes.
resilience in children, and that's what I've learned about this story, which is I
Mm-hmm.
can't make it any brighter than it is because it was really sad. But I really, when I look back at myself, I think, wow, this girl is resilient. So I have that within me, and that has helped me throughout my life. Of course, it's a very wonderful skill to have.
Yeah. So because everything you did had to come from within yourself. If the
Yes,
outside world of the people that are supposed to support you are not supporting you, and still you find your way,
yeah,
that's resilience, but it shapes you, right? So it's something that shapes the way you look at things and at life and at leadership, obviously. Is
yes.
there, do you, can you share sort of where you see that connection in the way you are sort of now, in the way you relate to others, and the way you are kind of thinking about leadership and experiencing leadership?
Um, yeah. Well, for one thing, growing up like this, it made me really sensitive to the context or to the dynamics in a certain environment. So, and that grew to be quite a talent for me now. So, working with teams, for example, it's it really comes in really handy to have that skill. Now, with leadership, that to be sensitive to the social dynamics in a certain situation, I think is essential, especially when we speak, and it's becoming so much more important nowadays, when we speak about relationships between people as maybe the most essential for innovation, for change, for being successful in business life. So in that sense, I think that taking that story of where you grew up, and that's another part of answering your question. Um, Knowing yourself might be the highest good in leadership. to know who you are, where you came from, and where do you want to go, and then choose that very consciously. And knowing where you were also makes for a certain vulnerability, I think, something that is really just so deeply human, and such a valuable skill even in business life, I think, to be able to relate in vulnerability with others.
Yeah, but it's scary.
It's very scary.
To be vulnerable, right?
Right, it's very scary. It takes a lot of courage to be okay with your vulnerability.
Yeah. Why do you think so? Why is it scary actually? Why are we scared to show ourselves?
I think we were born into, can I say, a system that holds these social mechanisms, right? Where you, and I was really a queen at that. I've just told you about that. Where you need to be wearing a mask. So, so that's one thing. And then the other thing is to live a fragmented life. So your work life is your work life, and your personal life is your personal life.
Right.
We're also living in a time, I think, where when you look at the burnout rate of people, where we can't deal with that fragmentation anymore in our lives. So people get sick physically. But those are the reason, I think, why it's very difficult. Yet, in the end, it's the psychological safety. You need psychological safety to open up, to connect, to show your vulnerability, to be in the not knowing.
So when did that happen for you? Because you went through the period where you were basically, although you weren't maybe aware of it, because you took it for granted, like that's just what life was for you. But when did you feel that you not, I wanted to say, when did you drop the mask? But so when did that happen for you, that you started realizing, hey, wait a minute, this is not normal? Or hey, when did you start being able to reflect on that?
I think that was a gradual process. So there were a couple of life-changing moments, and also just general growing up.
What were those life-changing moments?
So after I left home to study in Amsterdam, I was trained initially as a economist, and I really enjoyed that. I worked for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for a long time as an advisor. And I also, in that period of time, found myself wanting to know more about personal and spiritual development. So I thought, I'll just take a course. That course ended up being a complete training of 5 years to become a therapist. And that changed a whole lot for me.
Because as a therapist, you go through therapy.
Exactly. Right. And also, being systemically involved in how individual development works. Of course, you learn so much more about yourself. That's such a rich experience. It wasn't easy, but it was a very rich experience. And also in that time, I had my first child, and that changed a lot for me too. For when I became a mother, so when she was born, I instantly felt more of me is born with her. So I felt so much more of myself, and that's a process I couldn't, artificially produce in any other way. So it was that birth process, and then having a child, becoming a mother, that really changed a whole lot for me. And I really felt, when you speak about when did the mask drop, that was at least the last bit of the mask that dropped. I believe the mask was already dropping, but And that also gave me the courage to do things differently in life, for example. And so that was a very important moment for me.
Yeah, of course. What were the things that you were you conscious of doing differently? That it's like, hey, I can do this differently now.
I became even more courageous, I believe, but more courageous in the sense that I was holding my containment. I think that's such a beautiful word, containment. So you can be very courageous out of willpower, just decide to do something, and that's bold. But I felt I contained myself so much more, maybe because I had to take care of another human being. So it's a process of maturing, I guess. I can't remember what you asked.
Well, we talked about
question?
the life-changing moments, really. So,
Yeah.
and then I asked whether you were conscious of sort of the difference. You said you were more courageous, so you were able to do things more differently.
Yeah.
And I was curious whether you would be able to say or put into words what the things were that you were able to do differently.
Yeah.
But I'm also interested in sort of the story of when you started studying economy. First of all, so we'll get back to the other topics.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
Okay.
But why? So why did you start studying economy? What was the appeal? Is that because I mean, who studies it? I mean, I hated that at school. So, but so I would. Oh, I was like, oh no,
really?
Yeah. So I was like, why would you study that? No,
seriously.
tell me.
I was really good at it at school.
Okay. I was really bad at it, so that might help. So yeah.
I think so. That might have made you choose otherwise.
It can be the teacher. It can be. I mean, for me, it was a teacher.
Yeah.
I had a teacher that, looking back now, actually, I'm ashamed because I think teachers are rock stars. So I think, as seeing my kids going through school, I'm thinking, whoa. I mean, these teachers are amazing. So why? And at the same time, I'm thinking, why become a teacher for teenagers? Is like that's like it can't be worse anyway, because they just don't care. They just don't care, and I just didn't care, and so I'm ashamed. But he was also so the image I have is this very boring, gray, boring man mumbling in a corner, and trying to. But it's not true. It's just the way I perceived it. Of course, he was obviously young, because I'm probably older than he was now. Right. So, but anyway, so me, that was part of why I just didn't connect to the topic. It's part of it, not the only thing, obviously. But where was it for you that it sparked? You thought, yeah, this is really interesting.
Yeah, it's two reasons actually. I was good at it, so it's like a kind of an obvious choice, and it also brought me kind of safety. So the idea of studying economics for me was also maybe knowing for sure that I would end up in a very well job. That I would be able to sustain myself and to then live a life that I maybe at that time thought that I wanted. Like
what kind of life was that?
I can remember that I thought, well, maybe then I'll work for a multinational, like a car company or maybe Coca-Cola. And then I can at least, buy a house and buy a car. And it's
burn
not that
some
I was
rainforest.
Well,
what happened? What happened
exactly.
there?
No, it has nothing to do with a real aspiration, of course. I didn't aspire to that at all. Yet I wanted to feel safe. So just as I told you a couple of minutes ago about my father having this heavy depression, I needed a sense of safety for myself. I needed to build a home for myself. And I thought that was a home. So many years after I graduated, I did 2 studies of economics actually, and many years after I finished, and I found out that I was doing it for safety purposes more than that I was really drawn. At the same time, during my study of economics, I also took several courses in development economics. So,
Right.
which led me to, and I was already, it was very appealing for me to work for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Development Corporation. And I kind of knew that I wanted to end up there, and it did bring me there. So there was a really good purpose to it, actually, which eventually brought me to, well, I don't know how many countries, but I traveled the world, advising governments and advising companies about their trade policies. So it did end up really well for me in that sense, integrating my two aspirations, having a certain safe basis, a good job, and then also doing something to change the world. Yeah, so it came together in the end.
Yeah, that's almost like you knew exactly what you were doing in that sense. So then you became a therapist as well. So how does that
work?
How does that work?
What's that? I do a lot of things quite intuitively, and then they end up really well. So yeah, I was working at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, flying around the world, and then doing that job. And then I also trained as a therapist. And for me, so dealing with these quote unquote important issues, about changing the world and poverty reduction and economic growth, which was equitable, etc. They were all the most beautiful metaphor to speak about that period is that I was flying high up, first class, anywhere and everywhere, and the macro approach to that, to those challenges, worldly challenges, is very appealing. And then studying as a therapist at the same time, I got to sink down to the micro level of how humans work, how humans act and behave and develop, but also, and that's maybe even more important, how sometimes as humans, and as you can hear about my story as well, we're also broken in a certain sense. And we take that brokenness with us while we're going into the workforce, building, co-creating society with other broken humans. And that if we don't know about this brokenness, we create broken societies, right? So I got really intrigued about that idea of having that macro perspective and then also having that micro perspective. So in the end, becoming a therapist and being an economist, for me, brought those two levels together in a very logical way. So my work now is focused on how we as individuals create society, how that dynamism works. Again, I lost your question. I don't know if I've just answered it. I hope so.
Well, no, I was looking for the connection between being an economist and a therapist, and you answered that question really well.
Okay, great.
Can you, and I can imagine that it's more on a practical level where it becomes interesting to kind of, I understand the philosophy, these two kind of ways of thinking. I mean, I think combining two ways of looking at things is always, very powerful, right? Or three ways of looking at things, or what have you. So you have two lenses to look at reality, which is awesome. But how does it work in practice? So, you worked for the ministry. What happened next? Where did you combine the two things into, actually doing? What are you doing?
What
do you do when you do those two things?
Well, it all boils down to the coaching that I do now. So I coach individuals, mostly executives, and then I also do the team coaching. But it's the way that I coach. So it's always holding these two perspectives, holding the micro and the macro perspective. making a person aware of what happens on the inside also happens on the outside.
Can you explain
So,
that?
yeah. So who we are and how we heal individually also has an impact on our direct environment. So if we work on ourselves and we consider, there's this beautiful saying, and I don't know what the word is in English, maatschappelijkheid. So, no, the English word doesn't come up, but there's a societal aspect of an individual. We as individuals are not, I'm sorry if I'm really being philosophical. I know you wanted to talk about this very practical.
Yeah, I'm waiting until you tell me what you're actually doing. But no. So we're not getting there. No, sorry. Go ahead. No, please go ahead. I'll keep trying. And you're trying to kind of escape.
It's just a love of philosophy.
Yeah. No,
You
please.
can just consider it. So of course, it's working. If an individual wants to work on themselves, and they come into my practice, and it's most of the time it's something. On the job that's not working, or there's a relationship with a colleague that is not working, or their team and it's not working, or it's always something outside, and when we always end up with it being something on the inside. So it's always our own perspective. It's always our own set of beliefs, our belief system that makes our reality or how we experience reality. And if we are become courageous enough, and that's what I try to guide my clients with, if we're courageous enough to take a closer look at who we are, where we come from, where our brokenness lies, I can help take steps forward to heal that, to have people heal themselves, and then take their place in society as a much more healthier or a whole person. And of course, sorry?
No, which is your life story.
Exactly. So for me as a therapist, I feel really confident about talking about that brokenness, talking about healing, talking about being very vulnerable, talking about taking that closer look maybe every day of life, It's trying to live life consciously. At least that's what I'm aspiring to make conscious decisions every day. And I think that's a beautiful insight from this work that I'm doing and from the clients that I'm receiving, is that you can make that choice every day and you make that choice every moment. So also now we're writing a book about a new economy. It's quite a large concept, very large. It's very hard to take that in and to keep that overview or to feel that you have an influence as an individual. Yet, if we see that we have choices that we can make every day as individuals that have an impact on our direct and indirect environment, then it becomes a whole different thing. So,
is that what the book is about? How to influence the larger system as an individual?
Well, the book will be about what we consider as the highest aspiration of life is to thrive, right, for all life. And when we would develop a human economy that is in support of thriving, then it would be something completely different than the capitalistic system that it is now. Because the capitalistic system we know now is more degenerative than regenerative, for example. So it doesn't account for the costs made while biodiversity declines, for example, which in real life is really very important. So we're saying if that's the highest aspiration, if an economy should support that, support thriving of all life, then we need new ideas. And here's what, there's a whole bunch of people that already are thinking about those ideas and are doing that, implementing them. And it's been going on for a whole while now, but they haven't become mainstream as of yet. So there's about 10, 15 thought leaders that we will feature in the book, and their ideas, and then share their ideas, and then derive some fundamentals for a new economy.
And so we hear about new economy, and so, for instance, Amsterdam is embracing the donut economy, like Kate Raworth. So, what is your opinion about that? What is the donut economy, which is basically, and I think that's something that Kate Raworth also said, or at least I think I read it somewhere, that if we talk about circular economy, for instance, that is, so the donut economy is basically that's the next level, because it's not about circular, because you don't regenerate in a circular economy. Can you talk a little bit about that? What your opinion is about that, and about the donut economy and all that? Are there other? I mean, are there other examples of systems? Is it just that, or is there? Because I think there's a lot more going on than most people know.
Yeah, the discipline of economy is evolving, I think, really, really fast. So I think that's true. You're just stating. So a couple of months ago, I believe that it was made public that Amsterdam will embrace the donut principles of Kate Raworth. I thought, and why did I move from Amsterdam? That was my first thought. I thought we just moved 2 years ago from Amsterdam. Now I want to move back to experience all of this, because it's obviously it's a very compelling model to seek balance between human needs and then also the planetary boundaries. It's a very exciting journey, I think. So Amsterdam embracing that model is, I'll be watching that closely. Kate Raworth will actually also contribute to our book. So it's another reason to watch that closely. Yeah. Now, I believe your question was, what else is there?
Yeah. Who else is in your book? Who are the examples? Who should we be watching?
So the book will also be featuring Daniel Christian Wall. He speaks about regenerative cultures as a way of designing a new economics, regenerative economics. And there's much, much more about regenerating economics, regenerative economics. So I think that will be one of the next big things. I don't want to hype things up, because these are real terms, and it might not be speaking to many people who are listening this now. So to break it down, one of the main ideas of regeneration is that nature offers mechanisms. It offers laws by which we can design an economic system. Another main idea is that a bioregional approach is much more relevant than just a global approach. So, which makes for much more diversity. And diversity makes, for example, in agriculture, for a much more healthier idea of agriculture. Also, it makes for much more thriving communities to be more localized in your efforts. Yeah, there's so much to talk about. I wouldn't be able to. There's this whole idea of degrowth, post-growth. What happens after GDP? So there's quite a lot of consensus about GDP not being the main relevant measurement of success. So we should watch progress human progress, or just progress much more than GDP growth. So that's already quite a breakthrough, I think.
And what is your feeling about the future? So with artificial intelligence coming, with quantum computing, it's going to blow our minds. With the discussion on this, or at least our relationship to work, to jobs changing. So because we will be replaced by artificial intelligence, or at least many of us, which will kind of, do we then still make a living, or should we all be unemployed? So what is your sense? Because that is part of the economic system as we have it now, which really, the future scenarios don't really fit in the system that we have. So I mean, probably that's where all this kind of these new philosophies and this new thinking comes from, because it's so. What is your feeling about the future? And do you think that we are the ones developing the future, or is it more that we are adjusting to a reality that we are just being kind of confronted with, or are we creating that future? So are the new systems that you are thinking about proposing, are those the ones that are going to design or change the future, or are we just, is this just part of our evolution? We are just adjusting, and the wave is coming anyway, whatever we do.
The technological wave, you mean?
Well,
or whatever wave.
I mean, there are many waves. Coming. There's social waves. There's political waves. There's waves.
Natural waves.
A natural wave. I think that nature is telling us right now in this COVID-19 crisis. Yeah. Hey, hello. There's this. Your system is broken, or what? So what is your feeling about that future? That.
Yeah, well, so firstly, the wave. Yeah, obviously, COVID-19 is one of those waves that has set into motion, I think, the opportunity to transform. Obviously, I remember reading, I believe, an article about Kate Raworth, and she said the only way to stop. The only way to change is to have heavy polluters, corporates that pollute heavily, be closed down by force. And obviously, that at that point wasn't a very realistic approach. With COVID-19, it happened just like that. So a large part of the economy came to a standstill. A large part of our social life came to a standstill. And I believe that not just the phenomenon of COVID-19 as a pandemic, but the interruption of our habits is the space for change. So it created the space for change. And I think that is something that we can consciously avail of or not. I think a large part of the world, the global community, will not avail of that. But there might be some that will. And I feel, and it's only a feeling, like a feeling for sure, and not a knowing for sure, but I feel that feels like a gateway, as Arundhati Roy wrote in her beautiful essay. It's like a gateway to another world. So I feel that some people are called in this time to step forward, maybe even further, to share new ideas and new perspectives on a new life, because the momentum is just here. So that's one thing about the wave that you just mentioned. And then you also asked about technological development. Of course, technological development has for a long time been awaited as something that might relieve of people participating in the workforce as they do. So Keynes already saw, 100 years ago almost, he foresaw that the work weeks would become smaller because of technological development. Not smaller, but Shorter, yeah. Because of the technological development, people would have more free time. And he was dreaming of a world where that free time would be filled with personal development, with artistic development, with more creativity, more enjoyment, the good life, as it was called. And it still is a very important concept in economic thinking, the good life, and what is a good life made of. Now, that gets me to your third question about what does the future of work look like. What I really hope is that it will be possible for us to gift more of our talents. So now we work to get paid, and we get paid, that's important, because we need to pay our rent, and we need to pay for our groceries, etc. But if we were to flip that completely, which is kind of happening with COVID-19 now, some people forcefully lost their jobs or lost work, or but we haven't set in motion a system that appreciates the unpaid work. So there has been a lot of talk in economic thinking about the unpaid work that's been done by parents, for example. You don't get paid for your job of being a parent, but it's a job. It's a very productive job. It's a very important job. But your hours are not, they're not paid for it, but they're also not measured in terms of money. Yet they contribute largely to the development of a nation. But that's what we know. What we're now finding with COVID-19 is that many people have lost their jobs, but they are not worthless. They can still work. They have talents to put out there and to contribute to society. Only our current economic thinking, the capitalistic thinking, the ideology that we live our lives with or by, doesn't make that logical to do. And also you can live of it. So that's where the basic income comes in. That would really help make it possible for people to gift their gifts to society. Somebody who's written and talks about this really beautifully is Charles Eisenstein. One of his books is Sacred Economics. And he's also featured in a book, by the way. He speaks about this concept of the gift economy. So it's, again, an idea that is already being downloaded or planted in society, but it hasn't become mainstream yet. It's at this time, I think, an idea that is very relevant, very relevant. So the future of work, what I would wish for people to be able to do is to give from their talents and then live, make a living out of it, but in a very different way than a capitalistic way.
And we need, obviously, economists to guide us to create new systems, because it's the economic system that needs to change.
Maybe not even economists. That's the whole trick, I believe. Last year, Esther Duflo and Mr. Banerjee, they won the Nobel Prize for Economics. One of the things that they say in their book, they mention in their books, is how economists have become, as a profession, quite irrelevant. Well, irrelevant is maybe a very strong word. But we need, I believe, a much more multidisciplinary approach. So, yes, people that understand how an economy works, yet an economy is just a set of agreements, nothing more, nothing less, actually. But we also need ecologists, we need philosophers, we need artists, we need people that are willing to understand the multidimensional idea of life and how an economy can sustain life. That's the only way an economy will be relevant for us.
Right.
Again, quite philosophical.
No. I think that's pretty straightforward. Actually, we need people with different backgrounds. We need diversity of thought.
Yeah.
And the trick is that how do we get those people, or how do we get that philosophy Or how do we get that? How do we get that in a place where it has influence and it has power? And I guess it needs a crisis to make things move. And we are having a crisis, and things have been moving. I am one of those people, and I know a few people who said the same, who almost feel that this whole COVID-19 crisis, this whole period, might not be long enough. And it sounds really weird if
No,
that
yeah.
feeling is like, I'm almost thinking like, don't go back to normal. Don't go back in your traffic jams. Don't go back in your planes. Go start up those factories again. Don't go back to your offices. Please, we need different patterns of behavior. And has it been long enough? Has it been long enough? It's almost like you wish it would continue, knowing that that also means people are dying and they're getting ill, and it's not a good thing. But part of me is thinking, well, if this crisis needs to mean something, needs to have, I mean, the worst thing in my mind that could happen is that we have this crisis, all these people suffered, and nothing good came of it, and we just went back to normal, like we did in the financial crisis, after the financial crisis, like as if nothing happened. How do you feel about that?
Yes. So when you look at so from my perspective as a coach, right, a personal individual behavior is changed within a time frame of about a month, a little bit over a month. So I do believe that quite a lot of people had a certain experience that might help them to change, might help them to gain those insights that they needed. Yet what we've already seen is that ideally you would change your behavior in a conscious way, right? And with a certain guidance, for example, by a coach. So that wasn't. So people were really pointed to themselves for that change. So some people might not have gone through that frame very consciously. I don't know what I wanted to say with that. Yes, we're now slowly going back to what we are calling a certain type of normal, which of course is not normal, because you and I are still, we just spoke about that while we're connecting before this talk. We live in the same country. We don't live far away from each other, yet we still speak via Zoom. So we've made a very small change with also that we spoke about that, which also makes a very huge impact on the way we work, on the way we view time, on the way we connect to one another, for example. So I think you will find all these very small, these like incremental personal behavioral changes you will find over the next period of time. Then also there's this collective field that we operate in. So society, for example, is a collective field. An organization, the organization that you work for example, is a collective field, and it holds a very strong belief system. So it's very difficult to just change that. However, it has had a shock just now with COVID-19. So there's, again, a possibility for that change. And it's, I believe, between the dynamics of people that have experienced a certain shock, systems that are experiencing a certain shock, and then also the interconnectedness that has become so painfully clear that a pandemic lays bare how social inequality is of such importance and so palpable at this moment that it's almost difficult to, with that knowing, it's almost difficult to back to the not knowing. While before COVID-19, maybe we were a little bit less aware in the West, for example, and I feel it's really different for Europeans to be considering the opportunities for transformation than in India, for example. I was just talking to a colleague in India, and I felt really it felt really inappropriate. It felt really. There's such a huge difference between where we come from, where we live, that inequality, just becoming so painfully aware, that it also appeals to a responsibility that we might have.
You
We
have, at
as
least.
that, yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. That I have, but also we have in the
Of
West.
course. Yeah.
We had the luxury to be in lockdown. We had a home, we had food, we had people around us, we
Yeah.
had good healthcare,
Netflix.
Netflix, a Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi.
Yeah, we had
Yeah.
cars. We were able to move around
Yeah.
if we needed to.
Deliveroo to get us our pizza. No,
I
yeah,
mean,
I hear what
yeah.
you're saying. I hear what you're saying.
So I think that we also should trust the process. I always love that line, because there's just so many elements moving that
Yes.
is not just a matter of it needed to last 6 months longer for things to change. No, we can really believe that things are changing because we live in a living system. Our
So we need
life.
to watch. We need to watch and observe, as also I think become active. But to your point earlier, where you said, as individuals, if we change little things, then collectively we will change big things.
Yes.
Right? So the system, and so that's basically what you're saying, that we are. So there's two things happening. Certain things we don't even know that we are changing, but they're changing. But they just happen naturally. Certain things that we are kind of we feel comfortable doing now, we weren't comfortable about before this crisis, like talking to everyone online via Zoom or any video conferencing tool. So we have changed behavior. Certain things will stick, and if we all, and that's, so I'm really curious about what is it going to do. But I also feel that we do need to kind of also be more conscious about our actions. But it's difficult because it's about the things you do have a result. They have a consequence, and sometimes we don't know exactly what the consequences of our actions will be. For instance, if we talk about new economic systems and the differences between, like, for instance, India and Europe, or what we do, and this is obviously also kind of embedded in the whole donut economy. Okay, Raworth, where you look at the systemic problem. For instance, someone said to me the other day, when I said, well, I want to buy more locally, I think it's important, I have to choose local products. And someone said, yeah, but if you used to buy something that was manufactured in, say, Bangladesh by someone who makes hardly living, very poor, and you're so against that, but you stop buying that one T-shirt that they actually made that little bit of money of, then they don't make any money. So you can't just take that away. It is a systemic problem, and you have to take care of that part of the system too. You can't just kind of stop just on your end. You have to kind of, so that problem is so difficult for individuals to oversee, because to me it was like, but I want to help, and I don't know how, and I don't know what it's going to cause. So because the system is so complex, we don't really know what the result is going to be, what the consequences are going to be of our action.
Well, when corporate social responsibility really became like a hype, I think that argument that you just mentioned, you should still buy at, I don't know, H&M or whatever retailer you would buy from, because of this reason, then you would maybe provide for somebody's salary, but also as a consumer have the influence to change a corporation by making your consumer choices in that way. But I don't think it holds anymore, because what we've seen, and what you just mentioned also, because of it being a systemic problem, once we change our consumer behavior, then that's the influence that we have. We withdraw our demand, eventually leaving no demand, right? In the ideal situation. It does not mean that we are leaving the people in Bangladesh to their own devices. Obviously, a change needs to happen there as well. So we can't just knowingly participate in a systemic weaving failure. You get what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Maybe that's also, so it's an excuse almost, like, well,
it's easy.
It's easier.
Very easy.
Because it doesn't change your behavior. It can just do, what you've done.
It validates your consumer choice.
Right.
So, and to make it that important, so you and your consumer choice are the success factor of somebody's livelihood in Bangladesh. But that's not true, obviously. Your consumer choice has an impact on how the fashion industry operates. So if a very large group of people make different consumer choices, which is a responsibility of an individual, and an individual only, then something will happen. But if you make yourself responsible for that change somewhere, like it's a really big change, your poverty alleviation, that's what you're making yourself responsible for. But it's a very false choice. It's also a very false promise, because you buying at H&M or whatever doesn't make for poverty alleviation in Bangladesh.
Mm-hmm. It just keeps the system alive.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So the checks and balances within the system make for.
All right, you convinced me. I feel better. I feel better now. I will not. I will buy locally from now on.
Yeah.
I want that, and also I want to teach my children that those are the choices you should make. So I think we could talk about this for a very long time, because I'm very interested in this new economics. So last question: is the Ranger still there? I think she is, right? You are still the Ranger. Do you feel that way if you look back at the little kid?
Yeah, I think that I kept her alive within me. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
You should. Yeah. That's very beautiful. So thank you very much for this conversation and for your story. Very thought-provoking, and I probably have way more questions, but maybe I'll invite you another time to talk about more about economics and the connection to leadership and all that. But for this time, I thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for your profound questions.